Honestly, I think Star Wars falling apart is actually a good thing. Because not just Star Wars, but like everything in entertainment has kind of hit this thing where they produce these movies that really bust in the box office or just like kind of bust when it comes to streams. Just because a lot of people are like moving on with their lives and going out into the real world. Which is also why like television becoming so bad now is such a blessing in disguise. Because have you ever seen that movie like Cable Guy from like when movies were really good? Like that was one of the smartest scenes in the movie at the time. A lot of us just couldn't see it, where like the cable guy falls on the antenna and you see all of the cable just going out, and this one guy looks over, picks up a book and just starts reading, and it's like there's this happy music, like he's finally lost connection to the TV. That's like the same thing, except the power just doesn't have to go out. We just need like really bad content. Now, I'm not saying everything from Star Wars is bad. I'm going to be really fair and say like the Jedi games, like Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor, were actually awesome. And then from what I understand, Mandalorian was a mixed bag. There's going to be parts of it that you really, really like. And then I noticed from a bystanders community that, like from a bystanders, not community, bystanders perspective, excuse me, because I'm not really part of the Star Wars community altogether as a whole. It just kind of seems like some people kind of walked away from that series altogether. But then looking at this show, The Alkalite, I think like honestly a lot of Star Wars fans have just kind of like collectively turned on it, which is good because like at least there's a sense of community in the negative reviews that it's receiving. Like even non-political channels tend to be criticizing this show, whether they're being mild-mannered or they're just kind of being outright like the critical drinker and just roasting it all together. Because I'm going to tell you guys like a quick story. I remember like my last 2 years of college, I joined a Saber group just to make more friends. And let me tell you, fast forwarding like 8 or 10 years later, it's become the same group of people returning, and they're struggling to keep new members. Mainly because of the tribalism and complete dedication to anything that Disney pushes out with a Star Wars title on it. And if you don't say, you liked it, they're going to completely shun you. I mean, I was one of the first people to experience that. Now, there was a lot of personal issues with a lot of the people who were on the same team as that lightsaber crew that just kind of fell apart. A lot of egos and stuff like that. Basically, it was a bunch of 40-year-old nerds who had 20-year-old nerds under their wing, and the 40-year-old nerds were picking on the 20-year-old nerds. They even slang some stuff my way, and I wasn't the kind of guy to sit there and take that. So they didn't like the fact that I wasn't such a yes man. And when Last Jedi came out, it was basically the last call that it was time to have my last meeting with these guys to say my last goodbye. Because not only was I kind of sick of having, lightsabers swung at my head at full force, just when it's a double standard rule, like they could hit you in the head with a lightsaber, but you can't swing too hard at them, which actually was an altercation and an exchange that I got into. But I digress on that point. I mean, they were a bunch of hypocrites, but these hypocrites also kind of wanted to do whatever they could to suck up to Lucasfilm, because they actually thought that these Hollywood elitists who are obviously disconnected from normal everyday people would actually care about what they were producing, which, by the way, what they were producing had so many Marvel and Star Wars references in it, you could tell that it wasn't really a creative series that they were putting together. It was just them not mocking, but mimicking every line that you could find that made memes on the internet, and they just put it into a script. It was like if you asked AI, find every famous one-liner from every movie and compile it into a script, that's what you would get. But everything about them said, please accept us into your fold, Lucasfilm. We are desperate for you to take us and make us royalty. Which obviously this kind of Stockholm syndrome and lying to themselves is exactly similar to the schism that tends to be in the Star Wars fandom, where majority of fans have kind of like cashed out, but then there's some people who will just mimic it and like whatever it says, just thinking that it's gonna, one, they probably don't even understand enough about Star Wars, and they're probably just watching the show and thinking pretty colors. But I've noticed the people that actually understand the original lore and source material that they should be going off of, those are the ones that are like, okay, I've kind of lost all hope in Star Wars. And you know what? Maybe that's a good thing, because you know what? It was fun while it lasted. I myself watched the original trilogy of Star Wars. I watched the prequel trilogy. I didn't really like the sequel trilogy from what you can tell. But it was almost as if I left the Death Star as it was exploding, kind of a reference to episodes 4 and 6. Because I remember this all kind of goes back to The Last Jedi and how divisive it was. And not just that some people had actual problems with the script that I could listen to and say, hey, you know what, man, you got a point. But the Hollywood execs up top basically said that if you don't like it, you're hateful, you're every sort of ist in the book, and we don't need you here. And some people made a lot of content which backed it up. And you know what? There's a lot of content and controversy over it. But I think at one point I just kind of realized we're all kind of arguing over fiction. And sometimes it takes entertainment to get this bad for us to realize maybe we should kind of walk away from a vast majority of it. Obviously, there's going to be other shows out there that we can watch, and obviously we are going to watch a show or we are going to watch a series and we're going to get invested or we're going to play a video game. I've played the Far Cry games. I get invested in those sometimes. I get invested in Assassin's Creed, but they haven't been too far gone like Star Wars has. And maybe there's something a little bit more productive we can do with our times once we leave the whole Star Wars debate. Because although I do find some of these videos and the contents mocking the show kind of relentlessly entertaining, there comes a certain point where seriousness, I think we're just wasting our time just like the rest of the people who are endlessly defending this show, which probably are very few and far between. We're wasting the exact same amount of time as they are. And yeah, this is coming from a guy who's making a video on this subject, and I know you guys are probably thinking, okay, well, what's the bottom line? The bottom line is the peak of Hollywood entertainment overall and everything is pretty much at an end. Mainly because, you know, they've made it clear that the elitist mentality has basically been put on steroids. I mean, it's always kind of been that little conceited group of people. Like, we'd see things with, like, the Met Galas and the Oscars where they're all just in their own little group, celebrating each other, giving each other golden statues, while everybody else is kind of just sitting here in normal everyday life, and they're obviously more miserable than ever. Like, it's very reminiscent of every time you have a Royals situation and you have the common everyday worker who's just kind of like struggling at this point. And I think the best bet for all of us is just to kind of walk away, and not only that, but find freedom in trying to make our own entertainment. It might not look as pretty as theirs does, it might not be as world class, but I think that's where taking the time to master skills and like videography and kind of things that aren't AI are going to come in handy, because I think that there's a little bit of demoralization here where a lot of people are thinking, what's the point? And if you look at a 9-to-5 perspective, yeah, a lot of it could just be a losing battle for a lot of the times, depending on what job you actually take, because you're not making enough to support yourself when you're wasting your time, when time is probably one of the most valuable commodities. And, you know, money is an exchange of time. But we get so caught up in the concept of money that we realize, okay, what's the value? You know, what's the value of chasing a bunch of material things that, you know, the upkeep on them is just going to be more stress that's just going to end up rushing us to our graves sooner? When do we come up and realize that these Hollywood elitists don't really care what we think, and they're just going to keep pumping out trash content for us to like really walk away and gain a little bit of sense of our time and independence back, and maybe spend some time building some skills or doing something else? Because I'm pretty sure 99% of people online could make a better show than what Hollywood's pumping out, because obviously they just don't care anymore. And the creative sides and a lot of the just short form content of just people using musical instruments, all the creative aspects that people are throwing out there, that we have good times out there, is just this gigantic bright light in a dark tunnel where we could look and say, okay, we do have more creative potential, and it might not be a gigantic cinema masterpiece movie, but it is something. And it kind of shows just how many creative bones we have in our bodies, that we can collectively say, okay, let's let one thing that's been a part of our culture for a long time die out, because I think it's about time. Star Wars has been around us for a long time, and obviously there might be a couple hits. I'm obviously looking forward to the next Jedi game. But I think eventually the peak of Star Wars is obviously at an end. And I think the acceptance phase of grief, in my opinion, has sunken in to the point where I'm ready to move on to the next phase. I mean, actually, I've been ready to move on to the next phase since probably 2018. I think the question remains, who's going to stick around and who's going to keep trying to change a mud castle that's obviously falling apart because the tide's rushing up? Or are we going to move on, let the castle melt and go into the ocean and move up to drier sands and build something with a stronger foundation and realize we don't have to become exactly what we're arguing about? But that's what I got to say. Peace out.